we'll start.
What? Kevin. I'm sorry.
Hey, Sharon.
Hey, Sharon. Madison.
I know it started out Jackson, but I don't know. He got older.
I saw her today.
Okay. Yeah. So very important role. We're live, so anything you say may be used against you. He has to read the calls from the coach and make sure he calls them right.
Exactly, but he'll give him his motion, his numbers, and then tell him, left, inside, outside, down the middle.
What do you call a marathon for preachers?
A long nap, I don't know.
A rev run.
Oh gosh, okay.
He's coming up with all these jokes. I don't know what to say. I'm sorry.
Oh, well, you just let him go.
Y'all know why cows wear bells?
Yeah.
We just heard that one.
Because
She's already telling your jokes.
You telling my jokes?
She's telling your jokes.
Okay, what's the answer to the one you just said?
Because the horns don't work.
Close the door.
I had an experience with a bull one time whose horns did work.
Uh-oh.
It's the only time in my life I ever thought I was going to ride a bull. It all happened in one time. The first time, the last time, the only time. All right, so we probably wrap up Esther tonight because it moves pretty fast now that Haman's out of the picture. It moves fast, the story moves fast, but the narrative is stretched out over a long period of time, which kind of adds some drama from the reader's point of view that the writer's presenting. And it gives us time to process some things that have happened that we didn't even talk about everything last week because we kind of got to the end of what I'd studied and we had time left. So we're going to go back a little bit and look at some of that too. But what we'll do after this is next week we will start with the prophets. Okay, so we'll be going back. And we'll do them in chronological order. So we'll go back and review some of what we went through in the histories with 1st and 2nd Kings and Chronicles. And then we'll review that and go through what the prophets are speaking to in those time periods. So we kind of tie all that information together. And then there will also be 4 occasions where there's at least 2, sometimes 3 prophets contemporary to one another. And so we're going to look at all of those at the same time. So get you some bookmarks. Because we'll be looking at a lot of different passages because they're not the same. They're speaking to the same situations. But God in His wisdom addresses those situations from 3 different vantage points often, at least 2. And so we're able to pull all of that together and get a broader feel. But we'll start all that next week. And it will be the first time in 17 years that I've done all the prophets together. I've only done Isaiah and Amos. I've never done any of the others, so I'm going to really enjoy it. Okay, so in chapter 8... We'll start. I know we did some of this last week, but I want to go through it again. So it says, on that day, King Ahasuerus, which is King Xerxes, gave to Queen Esther the house of Haman. So on that day leads us to believe that all of this is happening in one day, but it really doesn't. There's on that day that Haman is executed for what he was up to, then who's going to have Haman's stuff? So the king, in his providential will, because he's king, just grants it to Esther. In an attempt to make up, because this terrible thing. Let's go back and review how utterly inept this king is. So Vashti gets thrown off of her throne because she won't go parade herself around in front of her friends. So he banishes her. Then he has 7 advisors that direct him on how to select a new queen. Right after that, there's this assassination attempt upon his life. And by the time that's over, he's down to 1 advisor who hates Mordecai the Jew. And so his solution to the one Jew is to kill all the Jews. Okay, and this king signs this edict because over a period of 5 to 7 years, he develops this great trust in Haman, which we find nowhere in the story where Haman has earned that trust. Mordecai, the Jew, is the one that should have earned his trust. Okay, later we find out that in this dream that King Xerxes has, he realizes that Mordecai was never rewarded for exposing the whole assassination attempt. And as God would have it, the reward that Mordecai receives for that is made at just the right time to help thwart this whole movement by Haman to kill all the Jews. So it looks like the king, in his ineptness, God is able to use that in order to bring about salvation for his people through Esther and her actions. At the same time that that's going on, Esther decides, hey, if I die, I die. I'm going to go make this request to the king. And everything happens just the way that it has to happen in order for the people to be saved. It's not supposed to happen that way, but it continues to happen in favor of the Jews, God's people. All right. So now it's all happened. Haman is out of the way, and the king, in some sense, is trying to bring about a sense of justice for at least Esther, because he's really detached from everyone else. The only other Jew that we have in the story with the king is Mordecai. And so the next thing he does is try to make up to Mordecai. He gives Mordecai the signet ring, and he clothes him in the royal clothes, and now he's second in command over all the kingdom. But we still got a problem. There's this edict that the king signed that is going to allow for anyone in his kingdom that knows of or approaches a Jew on the 13th day of the 12th month can kill him. And because the king has signed it, it cannot be reversed. All right, so that's kind of where we are. All of this has been settled with Haman, and there's this small sense of justice. So you remember, all the way through the story, we have these little things happen, and they're always a precursor to the bigger thing that's about to happen. Well, this little thing of justice has happened. Esther and Mordecai have been put in their proper places, one as queen and the other as second in command for what he actually has done for the king. But now we've got this bigger problem that has to be dealt with. So, on that day, the king gave the Queen Esther the house of Haman, the enemy of the Jews. So every time from here on out, Haman is identified as either the enemy of the Jews or by his ancestry, which is that of the Agagites. Say that 3 times fast. And of course, Agag was the king of the Ammonites that Saul did not kill. So you remember, God sent him out, you're going to destroy these people because of what they did to my people in the desert when they were wandering in the desert. But Saul doesn't do it. He brings back all the loot. And Samuel has to kill Agag. Okay? So now, this whole story of Mordecai and Haman is kind of the children of God against the children of Agag. And so we're reminded of that all the way through the very end of this. So, Mordecai came before the king, for Esther had told what he was to her. So, up until this time, Mordecai's been saying, you can't let the king know that you're a Jew. All right? And we asked that question before. Why was that such an important thing? Well, either this edict was going to be a problem. There's some foreshadowing there. Or there's already a level of anti-Semitism that has that is being raised up in the empire, because if you remember, Darius has allowed for them to go back and reestablish the temple and the city of Jerusalem. And we find nowhere in any historical record that any of the other people were allowed to go back home and do that. And remember, they had conquered many different nations, and they were all been scattered out all around the world. But God had told him, "You're going to let my people go back and do this," and he did. So there may have been some jealousy and some anti-Semitic type attitudes developing, and so that was the reason for the secret. But it's a secret no more. Then in verse 2 it says, the king took off his signet ring, which he had taken from Haman, and he gave it to Mordecai. And Esther set Mordecai over the house of Haman. So Mordecai had nothing. We hear of nothing that Mordecai owns all the way through the story. Okay? But now he's receiving from the hand of the king through Esther great wealth. Because if you recall, Haman was always bragging about his wealth. He had lots of sons, he had lots of stuff, he had lots of power, he had lots of all this. Now he doesn't have anything. So then Esther spoke again to the king. The first time was about Haman, and the result was favorable in her case. Not for Haman, but for them. So she fell at his feet and wept and pleaded with him to avert the evil plan of Haman the Agagite and the plot that he had devised against the Jews. So this is the first time we saw Haman, remember, on the couch. She's sitting on the couch, and he falls to her feet, and he is weeping for his life. Okay, the small event. Now this is mushrooming. Now here's Esther. She is falling at the feet of the king and weeping and begging, not just for her life. She's begging for the whole nation of the Jews' lives. So when the king held out the golden scepter to Esther, Esther rose and stood before him, which means, I'm not going to kill you. Go ahead and tell me what's on your mind. And she said, if it please the king, and if I have found favor in his sight, and if the thing seems right before the king, and I am pleasing in his eyes. Good. So there's four, that's a double dyads there. And by now we've learned when we get two, it's drawing attention to something that's quite important about that person. But now when we get four, it's just like building up and building up. So she's saying to the king, if there's anything about who I am that matters to you, it needs to matter most now. Let an order be written to revoke the letters devised by Haman the Agagite, the son of Hammedatha, which he wrote to destroy the Jews who are in all the provinces of the king. So here's this edict that she's referring to that was stamped by the king's ring. And the rule in Persia is what? Once the king says something, it can't be undone, right? Of course, it doesn't always work that way, but it does when these things are stamped with the ring, and that's the important thing. All right, let me just sidebar here a little bit. So the ring was a signet ring. So you knew how that works. They would take wax and drip it on the edict, and it would be pressed the ring, and it carried all the authority and power of whoever wore the ring. Okay. All right. So the same word that's used here about the signet ring, when it's translated into the New Testament, is the word icon. All right. So we know what an icon is. So the New Testament describes Christ's followers as icons. Okay. So we wear a signet ring. And so we carry the power and authority of Christ when we are his followers. So that idea, this very well understood idea, all further back than this, probably another 1,000 years back, all the way through to us, there's this idea that once that authority has been executed, it cannot be taken away. So Christ's authority cannot be taken away. And if we live in it and claim it, it cannot be taken away from us either. Wow, isn't that something? Okay. So that we understand how binding this is, we have to relate it back to how binding our faith truly is for us and what God has given us through our faith in Christ. So, just to help you see. So these Jews are spread out all over the provinces of Persia. How wide was that? You remember? From northern Turkey all the way to the Gulf, Iraq, southern Iraq, all the way to Egypt, although Egypt never said that they were under Persian rule. They really were. And then to India. Big area. So when Alexander the Great was able to take the Persian Empire, literally 4/5 of what he claimed as conquering the whole known world, he accomplished by taking the Persian Empire. And he didn't have to fight for it. He married into it. So it's pretty, so we talk about him conquering the whole world, but really that's how it happened. And so for this order to be reversed now, it takes a little while to get the word out, right? To everybody in an area that big. So this event is happening in the first month of the year, but the slaughter is supposed to happen in the 12th month. Okay? So you remember how they came upon the 12th month? They cast lots, and they kept casting lots for whatever reason they had to get the right date to have this happen, and it just happens to be 12 months later. Okay, so if the Purim had told them to do this in the 4th month, there would never have been time to correct it, and Jews would have been slaughtered. But God made it in the 12th month, so we got time. So you start going back. If we'd have made a list of all those quote-unquote coincidences that has begun to occur in this book, we'd have a long list of things that we know from the 30,000-foot view are not coincidences. So it says, "For how can I bear to see this calamity that is coming to my people, or how can I bear to see the destruction of my kindred?" So she's pleading with him from a place of intimacy with her. I can't bear this, so how can you bear it? Is what she's basically saying to him. Then the king said to Queen Esther and to Mordecai the Jew, "Behold, I've given Esther the house of Haman, and they have hanged him on the gallows because he intended to lay hand on the Jews." So he's kind of saying, well, I've already given you his house and all his property. He says, but you write as you please with regard to the Jews in the name of the king, and seal it with the king's ring, for an edict written in the name of the king and sealed with the king's ring cannot be revoked. So now we got a situation. The first order cannot be revoked, but he's saying to Mordecai, write another order that cannot be revoked to see if you can fix the problem.
Yeah.
So what he's saying is, two things have to be true at once, but they can't agree. That's what he's saying in this, which leaves the guy in a little bit of a problem to try to come up with a solution. So that's what's happening. So the king's scribes were summoned at that time in the 3rd month. So now we've already proceeded 2 months through this whole process, which is the month of Sivan on the 23rd day. This, by the way, is 70 days from when the edict was first issued. 70. That's how many years they were in exile. 70 years, 70 days. So this is probably not a literal 70 days, but it's a literary construct to kind of help us see that what was going on in the exile has also been going on in the 70 days. Uncertainty, chaos, not sure of what's about to happen. Okay? So, and an edict was written according to all that Mordecai commanded concerning the Jews to the satraps and the governors and the officials of the provinces from India to Ethiopia, 127 provinces, to each province in its own script and to each people in its own language, and also to the Jews in their script and their language. So you ask, why does they say script and language? Okay, the script that was used was official. You did business in the official written language. But the language that they're speaking of here is the common everyday language. All right? So English is the official language spoken in the state of Louisiana, but Cajun French is the language of many people that live in it. Okay. So that's what that's referring to. And he wrote in the name of King Ahasuerus, I say Xerxes because it's easier, and sealed it with the king's signet ring. Then he sent the letters by mounted couriers riding on swift horses that were used in the king's service, bred from the royal stud. These are mighty horses. That's the whole point of what he's saying here. You couldn't find better horses to deliver this message. They're not going to give out. If the message doesn't get there, it's not the horse's fault, basically. Saying that the king allowed the Jews who were in every city to gather and defend their lives, to destroy, kill, and to annihilate any armed force of any people or province that might attack them. So now here is the solution to the problem. Haman had not had enough foresight to write in his original edict, and the Jews can't defend themselves. Well, Haman comes back and says, I can't undo the order to slaughter the Jews, but I can put out an edict that says that the Jews are going to be able to defend themselves, which changes things to a large degree, because before it kind of like they're being led like sheep to a slaughter, and there's nothing anybody can do about it. That was certainly Haman's intention, but he was smart by half. Okay, and so now Mordecai has come up with this solution. We're going to send out this. If you attack Jews on this day, they're going to defend themselves. It says to any people or province that might attack them, children and women included, and to plunder their goods. And on one day throughout all the provinces of King Xerxes on the 13th day of the 12th month. All right, so the order before, remember, Haman had promised the king, I'm going to put how much silver? 10,000 talents of silver. An estimated 60% of the gross national product of the whole empire. Well, where was he going to come up with that? He was going to loot it from the Jews, who had been in the country for 150-something years now. Remember Jeremiah said, build your houses, have your families, plant your vineyards. You're going to be here a while. Make the best of it while you're here. And they did.
Thank you.
All right. And so they did. And that's how they were going to do it. So now the order is the Jews are going to defend themselves, and they're also going to loot you. Kind of a tit for tat thing we're having here, right? Which is not what we're taught about how we're to respond to things.
Yeah.
From our side of the cross, it is, you turn the other cheek, right? Okay. But there are times when God has arranged for a time where we have to stand with Him and not just behind Him. Okay? Those times exist. A lot of times it exists in our personal lives, a very simple idea. God can't act on prayers that you never pray. He just kind of sits there, can't do much. Okay? And there are situations in our own lives where if we're not interested enough to even pray about it, then what is God left to do? He's going to kick in the door and do it on His own and treat us as something that is less than what He's created us to be. So the same thing happens in other situations in life. Our children get in trouble, we fight for our children. We don't sit in the corner and say, oh Lord, please help my child, when we know that there's something we can do. Same thing here is what Mordecai is instructing to happen. And he's doing it for the right reason. And that reason is nothing less than justice. There needs to be justice established in this whole situation. Now, when justice occurs, and it is clear and in the open, it teaches the world a lesson. And you can look at our news headlines today, and you can see that what is actually being called for is some sense of justice in these various situations that are going on, let's just use the harassment of the Supreme Court justices. No matter what you feel about it, there has to be some sense of justice as to the law that is established to keep that kind of intimidation from happening. And the whole world is going to watch to see if there's justice in the land of the United States. Because if there's not, well, then you can go do anything. See? And that's what would have happened here if there had never been a reversal of the injustice with proper justice. Then there would have been trouble from then on out. And God knows these things. I mean, He lives in the world with us. He understands how, evil and sin works in the world, and it has to be met head on. So when Jesus says, that the gates of hell will not prevail against the church, that's not a defensive position that He's taking. That's an offensive position that He's demanding that the church take in order to establish His justice. So, a copy of what was written was to be issued as a decree in every province, being publicly displayed to all the peoples, and the Jews to be ready on that day to take vengeance on their enemies. This is interesting. So, the couriers mounted on their swift horses that were used in the king's service rode out hurriedly, urged by the king's command. So the king is not passive in this either. The edict's been written by Mordecai. Mordecai has used the ring that he's been given with all authority. Okay, but here we find that Xerxes is participating in this, although in kind of a wimpy way. Y'all, go ahead, boys. That's about as good as it gets. And the decree was issued in Susa, the citadel. So not only was it going out everywhere in the capital city, also. Then Mordecai went out from the presence of the king in royal robes of blue and white, with a great golden crown and a robe of fine linen and purple. And the city of Susa shouted and rejoiced. Okay, this is where it gets kind of interesting here. So the colors all represent royalty. It's the same thing that royalty would wear. The golden crown we have to distinguish from a king's crown. The language doesn't do very good in English, but you've heard the word diadem. Okay, diadem was the king's crown. Okay, and this golden crown was a different kind of crown. It didn't represent the same things, but second in command. Not bad, since just a few months earlier he was supposed to be dead just for being a Jew. And the whole city of Susa shouted and rejoiced. They're happy about it. So it's like there was this edict that went out from Haman that created a lot of chaos, a lot of angst, a lot of uncertainty, a lot of suspicion, of people. Are we really going to attack our neighbors that have been a part of our lives for all these many, 100+ years? And when the order went out, it was like, we don't have to do this. We don't have to attack these people. We don't have to kill these people. We don't have to loot their property. And so that's what happened in Susa. The Jews had light and gladness and joy and honor. So those are interesting words there. Light means what? Happiness, life. Okay? Huh?
Peace.
Yeah, peace. Gladness and joy are connected together in the language. So you got light, gladness, and joy come together. This is celebrative, not just outwardly, but joy indicates this inward. It's a sense of relief and honor. So here they were looking at a death date, and now the people that are non-Jews are holding them in honor. So you begin to see the reversal. Ever so slowly you begin to experience it in the language. But the date still hasn't come. So that's the kind of the tension point here. And in every province and in every city, wherever the king's command and edict reached, there was gladness and joy among the Jews, a feast and a holiday. And many from the peoples of the country declared themselves Jews for fear of the Jews. had fallen on them. So this is, so there's people saying, "Ooh, man, I know about these people." Okay? For 150 years, they've been telling their stories, and there's some pretty good stories. God telling Asa to just go sit up on the hill. I'm going to take care of the army. And the sun comes up and they're all dead because they've slaughtered each other. I mean, pretty good stories. So they say, you know what? I think I'm going to just identify with them. If anybody asks me who I am, I'm going to tell them I'm a Jew. All right? So there was that, or it could have been just that they were declaring themselves in support of Jews. Because the fear was that there is a God behind these people that can take me out. Goes all the way back to the promise God made to Abraham. Those that bless you, I'm going to bless. Those that hold you in disdain, I'm going to hold them in disdain. Or the word says contempt in some translations. So we see in this one little line, we see the great promise that stretches through these first nearly 2,000 years of their history coming to fruition yet again. God never turns his back. And it's odd that foreigners can see it just from what they've experienced and heard. And I also think there's a sense of it in the lives of people that are God's people. I think you can almost smell it on people. You know what I mean? People that try to fake their trust in God, sniff them out pretty easy. Mm-hmm. But the ones that are walking the walk and talking the talk, as they say, it's pretty plain. And you know that there's a level of honesty. I need to really reach for this person because they're going to see right through me. You begin to look, you begin to think about all the things. And I think that was part of this too, that they had an experience with God's people that defined them in ways that wanted to make sure they were on their side because God was on their side. All right, so that's the end of chapter 8. Chapter 9.
On that day, King Ahasuerus gave
I know.
Well, I've got NIV and I want to
It'll
follow
read?
with you.
Yeah.
So I put it on the
I got you. So now, 12th month finally gets here. It was the 3rd month when we last peeked in on this story. Now it's the 12th month. All right. So whenever the writer says now there's a famine in the land, and Abraham, now this, now that. So you know there's something that is about to happen. That's always a flag that they wave to let us know you need to start thinking about the narrative differently now because something's about to happen. So now in the 12th month, which is the month of Adar, on the 13th day of the same month, when the king's command and edict was about to be carried out, on that very day when the enemies of the Jews hoped to gain mastery over them, the reverse occurred. Okay, so there were still those in the land that were enemies of the Jews. Why does he use that language? Ties them right back to Mordecai, the enemy of the Jews. As if to say, there wouldn't be this problem if it hadn't been for Mordecai and his selfish, self-centered, narcissistic view of life that brought about all of this. So there were, on that day, there were some that were hoping to kill him and loot him. But the reverse occurred. The Jews gained mastery over those who hated them. So we see in one sentence the reversal. They had hoped to gain control and strength over the Jews, but the Jews actually accomplished that over them. The Jews gathered in their cities throughout all the provinces of King Xerxes to lay hands on those who sought to harm them. So this part, the Jews gathered in their cities. Important because they were largely agrarian. They had farms, they had vineyards, they were spread out in the land. Okay, so on this day, they said, you know what? There's going to be strength in numbers, so we're going to gather up in one place and we're going to defend ourselves. All right, so that's what they're doing. They gathered in the cities throughout the provinces to lay hands on those who sought their harm, and no one could stand against them, for the fear of them had fallen on all the peoples. All right, this goes back. This goes back to 1st and 2nd Kings. The people would come against God's people, and all of a sudden confusion and fear would come upon them. And in a rage, they would slaughter each other, or they would run off and leave, or something would happen. But they would have this overwhelming fear that something bad was about to happen. And in every case,
That happened to the Philistines.
that happened to the Philistines. It happened to the Ammonite. It happened even with Ahab. You remember Jehoshaphat teams up with Ahab because he's going to help Ahab, the terrible King Ahab.
Yep.
And you remember what he does? They get ready to go to battle, and Jehoshaphat says, "Isn't there a holy man around here we can talk to about this first?" He wants to hear from God first. And Ahab says, "Yeah, there's one up there, but he never says anything good about me, so I've sent him off to another city. I don't even want him around." And but they go get him, and he says, "Yeah," he says, "Ahab, you're done for. I'm just telling you now." But he says, God is going to do this thing so that you might know that He is your God. And it kind of just stops the whole story when he says that, because now all at once you've got this evil king that has come up against this formidable enemy. He's kind of lured in Jehoshaphat, who's a good king, but feels like he needs to give support to his northern brothers, and he asks for this word from God, and God says, "Yeah, I'm going to do it, but I'm going to do it so Ahab will know." Of course, what happened? The opposing army was defeated, but Ahab captured the king, and they entered into an economic alliance where they made money off the whole deal. All right, so God still, He said, "I'm going to make myself known," and He did in battle. But it didn't do a thing to change Ahab's heart. Here is the same kind of thing. These people are fallen, fearful of the Jewish people. And they've done nothing in 150 years to rebel or do anything. Why would they be fearful? Because they know that they're the people of God. No one could stand against them, for the fear had fallen on all the peoples. All the officials of the provinces and the satraps and the governors and the royal agents also helped the Jews, for the fear of Mordecai had fallen on them. So here you have this governmental system set up, 127 provinces, and there's governors, and there's the satraps were lower than the governors actually, and then there were other agents. They were like tax collectors and that kind of thing that went through, and so they weren't so fearful of God's people as they were Mordecai's power and strength. But where did that come from? It had really come from God. They wouldn't be in this situation. Mordecai would have never been able to be in the situation he was in unless God had managed the coincidences in such a way for making that happen. For Mordecai was great in the king's house, and his fame spread throughout all the provinces. For the man Mordecai grew more and more powerful. So this is another reversal of Haman. Same things were said about Haman. Started out with Haman, there were 7 advisors, and by the time Haman is running the show, there's only 1 left. He's consolidated all the power under him, and now Haman's dead, and the very person that he wanted more than anything to die has taken his power, and it's just growing and growing. The Jews struck all their enemies with the sword, killing and destroying them, and did as they pleased to those who hated them. So here we have this picture. Okay, their enemies came after them, and they literally slaughtered them. Okay, that's just, you can't get past what this means. And they did as they pleased, meaning that there was no one there to hold back their vengeance. And this is where we see kind of a dark part of this. But this is how God has dealt with the enemies of his people all the way through history. When he wants them gone, he wants them gone. And we see that from our point of view as being not a God that's loving and merciful and all those things. But to his people, he is loving and merciful, steadfast, true, faithful and true. That's the promises he makes to people that trust in Jesus. He doesn't make those promises to other people. So we often want to see, well, God's loving and merciful, and well, he is, but we find that in Christ. Christ is a fulfillment of all those things from this side. There's going to be people in one day, that they're not going to be treated lovingly and mercifully because they never accepted the truth of God through faith in Jesus. And that's what these people were dealing with. We've already seen twice, there's some people that are celebrating, we don't have to do this to our enemies. There's others that are saying, hey, I'm a Jew, leave me alone. And then there's these others that don't get the message, and they're dealt with too. So there's other options that have already been presented in the story. And the last most painful one is the one that's ultimately exercised to bring it all to an end. See, it's a very familiar tale that we unfold in the Old Testament, that we see unfold in Revelation and elsewhere. God doesn't change in the way that he does this. And that's why the work of the church is irreplaceable, and it's not available anywhere else. We hold a great deal of responsibility for the world that is lost, because God didn't have a plan B for telling them anything. We're it. And it's humbling, and we want to be good at it. So they struck the enemies with their sword. In Susa, verse 6, the citadel itself, the Jews killed and destroyed 500 men. So even in Susa, there were 500. And also killed, I am naming all those guys. These were the 10 sons of Haman, the enemy of the Jews. But they laid no hand on the plunder. Well, good reason. It already belonged to Haman. Okay. So here we have, he bragged about his sons. And now finally, this is the last. Well, besides his wife. I don't know if we hear about his wife. I guess we'll get to it here in a minute. But he bragged about his sons, and it was his wife that said, build the gallows, which was actually a 75-foot tall pole with a point on the end of it. Build the gallows and put Mordecai on the gallows, and ultimately her own husband was put there. And maybe that's punishment enough for her. Maybe that's just the end of the story for her.
For who?
For Haman's wife. Yeah.
I think it is.
Yeah. I don't think she's ever mentioned
They deal with
again.
the son, they don't deal with her.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's nothing that I've seen.
Yeah. Yeah, that's kind of like doing a heinous crime and hoping you get the death penalty for doing it, but you got to live with it the rest of your life, thinking about it.
I mean, they hung her husband and all 10 of her children. So
yeah, she lost big, because it really, we find that she had a lot of influence. She really may have been able to change the course of events from the very beginning, but she doesn't. She's kind of been sucked into her husband's narcissism and selfishness.
Or her narcissism.
Yeah, could have been.
Because then she winds up losing that at all.
Yeah.
Including the stuff.
Yeah, they may have been 2 peas in a pod.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah. Still sad. That very day, the number of those killed in Susa the citadel was reported to the king, and the king said to Queen Esther, in Susa the citadel, the Jews have killed and destroyed 500 men, and also the 10 sons of Haman. What then have they done to the rest in the rest of the king's provinces? Exclamation point. So what is he saying? Oh my goodness, if they've killed 500 here, there's 127 provinces.
He wasn't even worried about the Jews at this point.
No. I think he's, yeah. Well, yeah. To be very practical about it, this is an economic loss. Because before, and I'm not being callous about it, but he was going to make money off of the slaughter of the Jews. Haman had guaranteed it. Now there's this slaughter happening, and he is guaranteed nothing. So what's the moral of the lesson for Xerxes? Pay attention to who has your power and your might. You don't just give that away to anybody. See?
That's why he goes back to Esther. Okay, what do you want?
Yeah. He knows, all at once he knows what he's up against.
Yeah.
And it's more than just Esther and Mordecai that are powerful here. There's a lot going on here.
Be careful where you
He doesn't see that.
No.
No, it seems like, to me, it just seems like he was, I don't know what his age was, but could he have been just young and naive and just didn't want to be bothered?
He was in his 30s when he tried to invade Greece. This is 17 years after that. So midlife crisis maybe, I don't know.
Well, he's not young, but...
You know what else is interesting about this whole book? Is that no pagan gods are introduced into the whole thing. God's not mentioned by name, and there's no pagan gods that are mentioned either. Okay? The only thing that is controlling the situation is this own sense of greed and narcissism and pride. I mean, it really points out that that's the God at work here, is this individual thing about I'm going to be great, or I'm powerful, or I'm this, or look at all my wealth. It's all this me-centered. Boy, it's a big lesson for today, huh? And what results in that? Oh man, this is crazy. So what results in this self-centered, narcissistic life is rage. Haman's rage. Now look, we're in an age of rage today, really.
Oh yeah.
And where does it come from? I want my life, and I don't want you messing with any part of it. That's what it is. And if people don't get their way, they become Mordecai's. They really do.
You mean Haman?
No, I mean Haman. You're right. What am I saying? Yeah, I mean Haman. They become like Haman. And we're kind of seeing a lot of that, and it's generated from this selfishness and self-centeredness. But I don't want to get off on that. I may want to preach that one day, and you may want to hear it. And so, now, what is your wish? First ayat, it shall be granted. What further is your request? It shall be fulfilled. So here we're back. This is the way she asked the first time. Remember, I have this wish. I have this request, and he says, I will fulfill it to the half of my kingdom. Well, here we see that she probably achieved more than half of the kingdom. She's really the one in power now. She has the king asking her rather than she asking the king. That's a big shift. Okay?
Yeah, because it doesn't even say that she even asked. He just comes to her.
He wants to know. Yeah. How do we limit the carnage? I think is what he's after.
Yeah.
And he knows that she has power. Wow. And Esther said, and she does it perfectly, if it please the king, let the Jews who are in Susa be allowed tomorrow also to do according to the day's edict, and let the 10 sons of Haman be hanged on the gallows. Okay, interesting thing here, because it already says that they've been killed, right? There's a little
Turn the knife.
Yeah.
Kind of thing.
And the language can lead you to believe, well, they were captured, they were injured before, and they're going to finish them off. It's not really important, other than it's not a good day for the 10 sons. So the king commanded this to be done. A decree was issued in Susa, and the 10 sons of Haman were hanged. Now, different word than the other hanged. So, but they didn't do a lot of hanging by the neck until you were dead type thing. That's a Western thing that was invented in England. So I don't know what kind of hanging this was, but I can imagine they did some pretty awful things to people. I don't even want to talk about it. They would disembowel people and hang them from. That's as far as I'll go. So they were hanged. but probably not in the same way their dad was. The Jews who were in Susa gathered also on the 14th day of the month of Adar, and they killed 300 men in Susa, but they laid no hands on the plunder. So it's like this is the day after, and there were still people that were either not smart enough or not aware enough, but they were still declaring themselves enemies to the Jews, and they had the power to do something about it, and they did. So here we go. Now the rest of the Jews who were in the king's provinces also gathered to defend their lives, and got relief from their enemies, and killed 75,000 of those who hated them, but they laid no hands on the plunder. All right, so they keep saying that. Remember, when the writer keeps repeating a line, what is that supposed to tell us? It tells us that in a normal circumstance, you kill somebody and you take the plunder. In fact, that was the model of governance when Israel first wanted a king. That was the way all the nations did something. If they wanted stuff, they went and invaded another country, took their stuff. Okay, and so what happened with Saul? Saul went and he was supposed to destroy all the plunder, but he brought it back, and it cost him everything. God took his kingship from him, and Saul had to kill Agag. Well, now this is a reiteration of God's people saying, we don't want anything to do. We're not trusting in anything that we could receive from these people. We're doing what the edict said, but it said that they could plunder. But it's kind of like it really, you can take it all the way back to Abraham, where he rejects the gifts of the king after he rescued Lot. He said, look, I don't want anybody ever saying that you made me rich. My God takes care of me. And this is the same message. So
Except
again,
for Mordecai.
Huh?
Except for Mordecai, because he got the estate.
Yeah, he's a rich guy now. He's powerful. But we had to have Mordecai.
Yeah.
So this,
He wasn't the same as
yeah,
fighting.
yeah. If we would have not had Mordecai in the place that he was in, we don't know how the story would end. We know we couldn't have depended on the king. He hadn't been able to make a decision from the very beginning, a good one anyway. They're all bad, and so Mordecai had to step in and be the one that was going to be God's man in the right place, even though it's never mentioned that that's what's going on. So it said, excuse me, this was on the 13th day of the month of Adar, and on the 14th day they rested and made a day of feasting and gladness. So after all this is over, they made a day of feasting and gladness. But the Jews who were in Susa gathered on the 13th day and on the 14th, and rested on the 15th day, making that a day of feasting and gladness. Therefore, the Jews of the villages who lived in the rural towns hold the 14th day of the month of Adar as a day of gladness and feasting, as a holiday, and as a day on which they send gifts of food to one another. So, it's Christmas time. Yeah. They have a day. It's different than the city for whatever reason, but they have this day now, and it's celebrated. So it's this festival of Purim that we're about to get to. Still celebrated today. Still a day that is remembered, this event. So, and Mordecai recorded these things and sent letters to all the Jews who were in all the provinces of King Xerxes, both near and far, obliging them to keep the 14th day of the month Adar, and also the 15th day of the same, year by year. So the 14th and the 15th day, as the day on which the Jews got relief from their enemies, and on the month that had been turned for them from sorrow into gladness, and from mourning into a holiday, that they should make them days of feasting and gladness, days of sending gifts of food to one another and gifts to the poor. I mean, there's a lot of symbolism that just rests in this whole thing. Okay, so yeah, the 13th and the 14th, or 14th and the 15th day, I'm sorry, that becomes this festival of Purim. Okay, and then And then the significance, this is the significance of the festival. Not that they were just saved, that they got relief from their enemies, but that it had been turned for them from sorrow into gladness. Okay? So that's the same celebration we're all looking for. We all want sorrow into gladness. That's what Christ brought us. That's what the whole story is about. God just constantly is, it's like He knows we can't get it the first time, the third time, the 15th time, so He just keeps repeating this. I'm in the business of bringing into life gladness out of sorrow. Mm-hmm. And so this is another way for them to experience that. And a day of mourning into a holiday. You never mourned on a holiday. So I haven't thought I'm going to let go. I thought there is a day that we mourn on a holiday, but there's not. But this whole idea that God takes what is seen to be just the way that men had messed things up, and that's just how it's going to be. Haman's order had just brought about total destruction, and God in His providence turns all of that back the way that it's supposed to be, where what is good, right, and true overshadows and really conquers what is not. And they celebrate this, feasting in gladness, of course, sending gifts of food. That's interesting. Sending gifts of food. What's the idea behind that? You got any ideas about that? Why food would be the thing that they would send and not something else? Or why food at all? Okay. Food all the way through the in the temple cult, when they would bring food to the offering, it was meant to be shared with God. It was meant to be shared with the family. If you had Levites that lived in your town, you brought them to the feast and they got some. If there was poor people, twice a year, you invited them to your table. Everybody was at the table with God, symbolically, of course, and they had this great fellowship meal that declared that everything is unified and brought together.
There's something bonding about sharing a meal.
Yes. So fellowship, it's a fellowship meal.
Right.
And we do it still today. We love to share a meal with one another. And another reason why that is, not just because it's satisfying here, okay, but for them and for us too, to a lesser extent, but it was the fruit of their hands. Okay? They were offering of themselves to that. So the whole burnt offering was the animal of the best that you had, and you gave it to God as a full dedication to God. And the cereal offering or the meal offering, you had to plant that, meal it, make the bread. It was a product of your hands. And here they are sharing life together through what they are able to produce. And it's also an extension of being able to say, God gave me this, and I'm giving some to you. And that becomes a statement of living all the way through the New Testament. You know, if you have 2 cloaks, you give one. If somebody needs you to carry their stuff a mile, you give them 2 miles. You go more because it is what you're able to give of yourself to someone else. And so they do the same thing here, maybe as a testimony to that fellowship offering that they give to God. Here we are, we're sharing this meal with one another, and we're sharing it with the poor that are among us that have nothing. They're not left out of this great thing that God has done for us, where we were condemned, but now we're no longer condemned. We've been set free from that condemnation, and we've been set free through victory. And that's the same message that comes for us. So the Jews accepted what they had started to do and what Mordecai had written to them. For Haman the Agagite, the son of Hammedatha, the enemy of all the Jews, they got 3 there, not just 2, had plotted against the Jews to destroy them, and had cast pur, that is, cast lots. So that was the name of the thing that they would throw, the pur, to crush and destroy them. But when it came before the king, he gave orders in writing that his evil plan that he had devised against the Jews should turn on his own head, and that he and his son should be hanged on the gallows. So here we get this little summary statement by the writer. Therefore they called these days Purim, after the term pure. All right? So casting lots, he would cast the pure, and so they named the festival Purim because all of this had been set into motion by the casting of these lots. If he had not received a word from the Purim, Haman would have never done anything. And Esther may have never been queen, and here we go. Boom, 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 boom. The dominoes begin to fall. Therefore, because of all that was written in this letter, and of what they had faced in this matter, and of what had happened to them, the Jews firmly obligated themselves and their offspring and all who joined them, that without fail they would keep these 2 days according to what was written at the time appointed every year. So every other festival that the Jews kept was written in the law of Moses, except for this one. This was written by Haman because God's people had been delivered.
By Haman?
By Mordecai, I'm sorry. Thank you. And it was written that at the appointed time every year, that these days should be remembered and kept throughout every generation, in every clan, province, and city, and that these days of Purim should never fall into disuse among the Jews, nor should the commemoration of these days cease among their descendants. So the idea is this, what? Never forget. That's right. Never forget. Because it can happen again, and lo and behold.
It did.
Yeah.
It didn't work out so good.
No. Yeah. So it's, God prepares us for all things. Then Queen Esther, the daughter of Abihail and Mordecai the Jew, gave full written authority confirming the second letter about Purim. So they established this through an edict again, the seal of the ring. Letters were sent to all the Jews, to the 127 provinces of the kingdom of Xerxes, in the words of peace and truth, that these days of Purim should be observed at the appointed seasons, as Mordecai the Jew and Queen Esther obligated them, and as they had obligated themselves and their offspring with regard to their fast and lamenting. So this reads like legalese almost, the way that it comes down. We get to this place in the words of peace and truth. When all of this is settled, when the dust is cleared and it's all over, everybody involved is realizing that God's present. They don't say it, but the people that were non-Jewish want to be identified with Jews. Many of them feared. The 75,000 didn't, but there was a recognition of what God was up to. And when there's a recognition that God has settled in, and that's where He is, it usually is followed by peace. So when we look back at the kings that led their people into proper worship of God and honoring the law of Moses and those things, well, that would go on for a period of time, and it would be peace. There would be no attacks. There would be nothing going on other than worship and dedication to God. And so as much as joy became a part of their life with God, peace did too. So when it was present, it was like a signal light that's saying, hey, you better look around because God's here and He's busy and He's taking care of things. So the same thing is happening, and part of that recognition that God is there is that this festival of Purim is going to become a part of their lives. The command of Esther confirmed these practices of Purim, and it was recorded in writing. The other thing that happens at the end of this is the king's not commanding anything. Who's commanding? Esther. Yeah.
It doesn't say that any Jews were lost.
None were lost.
75,000 deaths in one time.
One Jew was lost.
Talk about the hand they got.
Another one of those coincidence things that we have to look, oh, well, they just, So, and we see, all right, Esther moves from this simple little girl, and she's favored by a eunuch that thinks she's beautiful, grooms her. This takes 5 years to get all this done. Thousands upon thousands of girls are brought through these harems, and she's the one that's picked. Okay? She minds her place because she does exactly what she's been told to do by the eunuchs and by Mordecai, okay, to keep her identity and to know how to approach the king and all those things. And then finally gets to the point of saying, oh, this terrible thing has happened, and if I die, I die. I got to do something for my people. Mm-hmm. She's never been in a place in her life ever where that kind of decision must be made and it have such weight. I mean, not even the decision she's never made, but to do it for the first time and it have such weight. Mm-hmm. And so she's she's intuitive about how she goes about it and very intelligent about how she goes about informing the king about what has happened and what needs to happen. And as we move through this, we see that the king, in all his ineptness, it comes to full light, because that's what's really created this problem for the Jews, is his ineptness. And as that is dealt with through Mordecai's declaration that the Jews defend themselves, we see that the king is diminishing and Esther is increasing, to the point to where now the king is asking, what do you want to do? He's not waiting on her. And then here at the end, she's ultimately making commands for the whole nation. So let it never be said that God doesn't use women, like some are in the habit of saying. He uses women in his work in powerful ways. So the greatness of Mordecai, we may get through after. Oh, maybe not. What time is it? Oh, that's the end. We'll get this. The greatness of Mordecai. We'll just read this. So King Xerxes imposed a tax on the land and on the coastlands of the sea, and all the acts of his power and might, and full account of the high honor of Mordecai, to which the king advanced him. Are they not written in the book of the Chronicles of the kings of Media and Persia? So this is what happened. If you remember, Xerxes had gone to Greece to fight the Greeks, and he lost. This whole story opens with this 6-month banquet, wooing and courting people to come be a part of this war that he's about to undertake with Greece, and he loses, and he comes back near broke. And so that's why the 10,000 talents of silver was so attractive to the king from Haman, was because it was going to help him recover from this ill-fated attempt at conquering the world. And so now there's a tax. So it's just reminding us that the king still got things are kind of like, well, we're going back to normal, except Mordecai has his place in the midst of all of this. And it goes on to say, for Mordecai the Jew was second in the rank to King Xerxes, and he was great among the Jews and popular with the multitude of his brothers, for he sought the welfare of his people and spoke peace for all his people. So, at the end of this, what we see is that God has kind of set up a king in Persia for his people. Okay? Now, the interesting part about all of this is you remember when we started this, you go between chapter 6 and chapter 7 of Ezra, and there's the story. Okay? And Ezra comes on the scene probably 70 years after Zerubbabel was allowed to go back and begin this process of restoring Jerusalem. So we have this remnant that returns, and we have this huge population of Jews that have not made up their mind to return to the Promised Land. They've been there for 150 years, and that's where they're going to live. All that really doesn't change much. For a very short time, there's a rally of nationalism in the Maccabean period, and it lasts for a good long period of time. And they hold off the Greeks until Rome comes in, and then they finally take everything. So even with all this going on, there's the backstory that we've already looked at in Ezra and Nehemiah, where there's this great restoration going on in Jerusalem. But what's interesting about the story, about this record of it, and in Ezra, is you don't read, there's no cross-references to these two events. So it's like God uses Ezra and Nehemiah for us to focus on what is happening in Jerusalem and the importance of that. And then he uses Esther to focus on the importance of the events that surround the restoration and provision and preservation of his people while that's going on. So they're getting things ready in Jerusalem, but there's still this need for preservation in the Persian Empire. So God's not moving in this monolithic way through the history of his people. He's got a lot of irons in the fire, still bringing about what he's promised to bring about, ultimately through the advent of the Messiah. And it takes a lot to get all that, Yeah, it does. He still does, doesn't he? Lots of irons in the fire. And he's constantly having to deal with those. But it also reminds us, too, the promises that he made are not beholden to geography, like so many of the people believe that they weren't on that little piece of ground, Israel, that God could not be their God and he could not hold his promises. The promises were made to geology and geography. Mm-hmm. But we keep discovering as we look, especially in the prophets, we did see it more and more, God's not beholden to a stamp of land on the ground or even to a genealogy, because he holds to his promise that Abraham has to do two things, okay, when he's made a promise, the second of which is to be a blessing. He's supposed to go where God tells him to go, and then secondly to be a blessing to who? All the nations. And so this whole exile thing, even this with Esther, we're reminded that God is really at work bringing about the fullness of that promise. Not only that Abraham receives, or Abraham's offspring receives all that God had promised them, but ultimately that offspring will be a blessing. And that ultimately is brought about through Christ, because his salvation is for everyone. He didn't make any bones about it. I unplugged that and I didn't wait. Bye.